Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and religion, where we will take it all very, very seriously, but not too seriously. Ladies and gentlemen, episode 29 is a very special episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast, an episode dedicated specifically to a spiritual journey that I took in Costa Rica, a journey with ayahuasca, Mother Ayahuasca. While I was in Costa Rica, I went on a spiritual journey. I drank ayahuasca. This episode will be one of potentially 4 episodes where I will discuss what I went through, the journey that I took, and the epiphanies that I had while I was with Mother Ayahuasca. This was easily the most difficult episode of the podcast that I've ever done. Not only writing it out, not only recording it, but editing it, and then re-editing it, and then re-editing it. I had to, on more than one occasion, confront my resistance and confront my fear of my own vulnerability. It is difficult to describe the extent, the breadth of the journey, but I tried. While in Costa Rica, I participated in ayahuasca ceremonies on 4 straight nights. The following is an introduction into what ayahuasca is, what an ayahuasca ceremony is, why the hell I would do something like this, and what happened on the first night. Like every journey, the first step is the hardest, and I believe that I've actually taken that first step by recording this podcast, editing this podcast, and getting it ready to publish. But then again, I haven't actually hit that publish button yet, have I? I'm a bold talker sitting in my office in front of a microphone by myself. But if you're actually listening to this, I went through with it. I hit that publish button. Strap in, kids, because we're about to go on a ride on a spaceship.
Act 1, Mother Ayahuasca.
As I explained in previous podcast episodes, namely episode 26, but some in episode 27, I went to Costa Rica. I spent time in Costa Rica on vacation, and in my attempt to return, I tested positive for COVID and then had to quarantine there for what was another 8 days. While I was in Costa Rica, I met Mother Ayahuasca. I went to a resort in Costa Rica, of which there are many, that has what is called medicine ceremony, and I drank ayahuasca. Because of the stigma around drugs in general in the United States, I did not tell many people that I had the intention of doing this while I went to Costa Rica. Quick tangent. Yes, everyone who's listening to this podcast, everyone who might listen to this podcast, is in some way, shape, or form taking some kind of drug, prescription or otherwise. This fantasy, this dream that we're living, that somehow that company in that big white building sending these little white pills to doctors in their little white lab coats, having that doctor prescribe to you the drug on a little white prescription pad, that somehow this sanitizes the fact that we're all a bunch of drug addicts. It is our collective cognitive dissonance, is it not, dear listener? Without it, the crack epidemic, the methamphetamine epidemic, and now the opioid epidemic, well, it just couldn't exist. There isn't enough space for these things to exist unless we create it. Tangent concluded. Curious about ayahuasca, wanted to go through the medicine ceremony, but given its illegality in the United States, couldn't really find a place to do so. If you inquire, dear listener, if you try to find a ceremony in the continental United States, often it is done in very secretive undertones. There are a number of churches that claim exemptions that have been upheld by the United States Supreme Court, that ayahuasca is part of a medicine ceremony, which is part of their spiritual ritual. Shaman who actually conduct the ceremony are akin to a priest or a pastor or reverend. I think one of the main issues is the fact that many of the people who actually want to go through ceremony do not want to be participants, adherents, congregants, members of a church. Although it is certainly spiritual practice, someone desiring of going through ceremony may not want to go through the formality of actually becoming a public member, a disclosed member of a church in order to do so. Now, in Central America, in South America, and even in North America, in the country of Mexico, ayahuasca ceremonies are legal. They are actually regulated in many of these countries that allow for ayahuasca ceremonies to be conducted, but they are legal. Accordingly, you get a number of Westerners being from North America, from Britain and Europe, from the land down under in Australia. You get a number of Westerners that will gravitate towards these places in order to go through, in order to have this ritual, this ceremony with Mother Ayahuasca. Costa Rica in particular has a number of resorts that actually market and advertise a resort experience, a resort lifestyle, while also having ceremony, a spiritual experience in ceremony with Mother Ayahuasca. Now, many of you, when you hear me refer to ayahuasca as Mother Ayahuasca, given that most of you know me, right? This podcast hasn't reached the kind of circulation, hasn't reached the kind of distribution where most of the people who are listening don't already know me. You may hear me say that and say to yourself, that shit drove him crazy. What is this hippie bullshit? What the hell is he talking about? I will discuss at length those elements of the ayahuasca ceremony, what I think you could refer to as the lifestyle elements surrounding ayahuasca practice, the ceremony. But it is very clear why it is referred to as Mother Ayahuasca. Once you go through the ceremony, it is apparent. Ayahuasca gives you exactly what you need. It doesn't give you what you want. Like any real, like any true, like any supportive parent, it gives you what you need. It doesn't give you what you want. That epiphany alone, that realization alone, having gone through it, having come to that place, is the reason why I refer to it as Mother Ayahuasca. I got exactly what I needed, which was nothing like I expected, and, frankly, nothing like I had wanted when I went to do this. You may be inquiring, dear listener, well, where did you go? The resort was called Rhythmia, Rhythmia. Well, we are spellbound, says the audience. Tell us more. It was a beautiful place and a beautiful location, but for the sake of this podcast and all the things that I want to get to, consult your local Google machine. Your Google machine will not disappoint you. I think this very podcast, the things that we will discuss, will be a testament to, will be an endorsement of Rhythmia as a vacation destination and as a spiritual destination. So the next question you may have is, why? What motivated you to want to do this? The universe is strange, dear listener. The universe is strange. Over the course of the last 6, maybe 8 months, I can't tell you how many different references to ayahuasca I had presented to me in popular culture, in the media, from contemporaries, from colleagues, from friends. One of the things that put me over the top was a podcast between Jocko Willink and Dakota Meyer. If you don't know who these two individuals are, Jocko was a Navy SEAL. He was a team leader. I don't know off the top of my head or by way of reference what his rank was, but he was in senior leadership positions with the Navy SEALs. He has a number of books about leadership. He gives lectures. He goes and works with major organizations, major corporations with regard to leadership, and he has a podcast. Dakota Meyer is a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient for conduct, for actions, for bravery in Afghanistan. In that podcast, Meyer discusses the actions that he took on the fateful day where he was involved in a massive firefight with the Taliban, but he also goes into detail about post-traumatic stress disorder, the things that he's gone through after having circulated back to the world and trying to now live what any one of us would call a normal life. In that podcast, he speaks of having gone to Mexico to take a spiritual journey under the influence of dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine, you say? What is that? Commonly referred to as DMT. It is the active psychoactive ingredient in ayahuasca. Meyer speaks at length about not only the process, but his personal experience with the process and the fact that in many ways he made more progress in a 48 to 72 hour period having taken DMT than he had in 10 years of therapy. The two discuss at length the fact that a number of servicemen have gone to foreign countries to go through an ayahuasca ceremony to deal, to manage, to alleviate, if not remove, post-traumatic stress disorder. It all comes back to a simple concept that it is a spiritual journey inside oneself. So you are going to be forced to meet, if not confront, the true you, the real you. 5 years ago, I would have thought this is some hippie bullshit and there's no way that I'd want to participate in it. But as of late, I have been challenging myself. This podcast is a very testament to as much. I have been challenging myself, examining the way that I look at the world. That started, of course, with my loyalty to these sports franchises, but it certainly bleeds over to politics. It certainly bleeds over to religion. It certainly bleeds over to social issues. And this journey, this part of my examination became very attractive to me. Plus, I'd never been to Costa Rica. That was something that I had an intention of doing. And if I could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, more the better. So to conclude this first part of the segment, what is ayahuasca? What happens? What are you actually doing? Ayahuasca is a root. It grows in, I believe, South America exclusively, but there may be roots in Central America. Like with any other drug, it is grown in one area of the world and it's exported to others. But the long and short of it, it's a root. You take that root, you mash it up real good, and you boil it. The end product, I've heard it referred to as a tea, but basically it's this dark elixir. It has the consistency of like a Robitussin, perhaps a Robitussin times 2. And yes, they call it Mother Ayahuasca, and probably for good reason, because it tastes like Mother Earth. It tastes like dirt, and not a short dirt taste. It has a long aftertaste. It's a combination of tastes that I can't quite describe, and frankly, I don't want to, because I start having recollections of the actual taste, and it's not good. So you drink it down. What then? The shaman who perform these ceremonies do not hide the ball. They're very honest. They're very frank. I found it somewhat interesting that I don't think that frankness translates to the media, the marketing for these ceremonies. But the shaman, they are filled with truth and light. And the truth is, you're going to purge. Purge, you say. Purge, you ask. What does that exactly mean? Whether it be through sweat, whether it be through shivers or shaking, whether it be through vomiting, whether it be through defecating, you are going to purge. There are things, dear listener, that we are all hanging on to. Yes, I know that you're hanging on to these things. I'm hanging on to them as well, or I was. But these things are energy trapped in your body. They can be shame, they can be guilt, fear, anger, doubt. But these things are a part of you. You are hanging on to them. And frankly, the shamans, again, very forthright, very frank. They are not necessarily a bad thing, or at least they weren't a bad thing when you developed those emotions and you operated under those emotions in order to get through an experience in your life, in order to comport yourself to the parameters that you were operating under at some point in your life. Often, what we refer to as these negative emotions are developed when? Think about it, dear listener, when you're a child, when you're growing up. Harken back to the old Shakespeare quote from the eternal Hamlet, "Nothing is good or bad, only thinking makes it so." At the time you developed shame, at the time I developed shame, it may have been in service of our growth and advancement as adolescents, as young children. Unfortunately, that shame, it still lingers. You still hold on to it. I still hold on to it. As I'm going to discuss in depth later on in this very podcast in another segment, no one teaches you shame and then gives you the manual on how to operate under shame. When do you start to feel shame? When can you stop feeling shame? When should you apply shame to a situation? When is shame inapplicable? Again, very often we are taught these things. We could be taught these types of emotions, shame, guilt, doubt, when we're 2 years old, when we're 3 years old, when we are 4 years old, and we use those emotions to operate within the family paradigm that we find ourselves in. When your parent, when your sibling, when your grandparent taught you these emotions, did they give you any kind of guidance? Was there any kind of manual? No. You were taught these things, and then you were allowed to operate with this as part of your toolbox with no guidance whatsoever. I have been around children. I do not personally have any. I have been around children. You give a child a 32-ounce glass of water, what do you expect to happen? That water's going to hit the floor, isn't it? You don't trust that child to have a 32-ounce glass of water because you were afraid that child is not responsible enough to make the appropriate decisions consistent with that water simply going into the child's mouth. Yet none of us have any reservation about teaching that child guilt and then letting them go. You did something, you should feel guilt. Once you feel guilt, I'll feel justified as a parent, as an authority figure, and you can just go about your day with the application or the inapplication of guilt from here on out. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, dear listener? You never knew what shame was until it was taught to you. You never knew what guilt was until it was taught to you. You didn't come to some understanding of it. Someone taught you how to do it. And again, within the confines, within the parameters that you were living in at the time, it may have been quite an asset. Is it an asset to you today? Be honest, dear listener. Is it an asset to you today? Are you still hanging on to it? Are you still applying it? I think it's safe to say, are you still misapplying it? And are you wrestling with the consequences of continuing to do so? I'm not afraid to sit here and admit to you, of course, I do wrestle with these things. And I am done wrestling with them. They are tools that no longer serve me, and I wanted to adopt a new tool set. I wanted to figure out how I could start working in service of myself instead of working against myself. Mother Ayahuasca, here I come. Okay, you say, dear listener, but what does it do to you physically? What are you actually going through? You are purging these emotions. You are purging out all of these repressed emotions. And to the extent that you have resistance to doing so, you go through a more violent purge. That is the one thing that I can say here, sitting here today. This is uniform among people who go through an ayahuasca ceremony. Outside of the purge, the experience is specific to you. No two people are really going to say, I had the exact same experience. There are specific similar manifestations. In other words, people will say, I had a scenario that played out very similarly. I saw the same thing, but I saw it in this context. I saw it under this type of vision, under these circumstances. Again, Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want. So there are some consistencies, but it's always going to be specific to you. There were people who literally slept through most of the ceremony. There were people who laughed through a considerable part of the ceremony. There are people who said, nothing's really happening. I'm not getting any kind of reaction. There are people who said, it was the most beautiful experience I'd ever had in my entire life. Although there will be consistencies, none of us have the same exact life experience. All of us are unique and we have unique life experiences. Therefore, our relationship with the ceremony, our relationship with Mother Ayahuasca is going to be unique. And that leads me to the next segment. You are likely sitting there, dear listener, asking, get to it, man. What happened to you? Ask, and ye shall receive.
Act 2. I'm totally tripping balls.
As I stated in the first act of this very podcast, the Mother Ayahuasca has a different journey for each person. Not everyone's going to have the same experience. Well, you may ask, dear listener, what was your experience? In the immortal words of Ike Bravlosky from South Park,
I'm totally tripping balls. I'm totally tripping balls.
That's right. Mother Ayahuasca had a strong hallucinatory effect upon me. I was tripping balls. But before I go into detail about my experience, understand that leading up to the ceremony, you have an opportunity to speak to, work with shaman and other people who are going to be involved in that ceremony. And what they tell you is that you should go into the ceremony with intentions. Be intentional. Why are you there? What do you hope to discover? Naturally, as more experienced practitioners, as people who have been with Mother Ayahuasca many times, they have numerous suggestions for you. But really, what they want you to do is focus. So it boils down to two things, particularly for the novice, such as myself. What are those two things? First and foremost, you ask, show me who I have become. This is a powerful intention. This is a powerful statement. Within that intention, within that statement, you are going to experience a number of things. And these come down to what? Thoughts and feelings. It's the same thing that we go through every day. What are your thoughts and what are your feelings? And during your journey, during your experience, you ask yourself, when have I thought this thought before? When have I felt this feeling before? Then you push deeper. And this is a very important part of the ceremony, of the process. You are going to want to, you will have the inclination to resist and then to back away, to basically run away. Those more experienced, those more wise will recommend to you, don't run away, run towards it. Move towards it. Move towards the thought. Move towards the feeling. As you are moving into the thought, as you are moving towards the feeling, ask yourself, when was the first time I ever thought this? When was the first time I ever felt this way? Folks, Mother Ayahuasca doesn't disappoint. Again, Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need. Exactly what you need. Is that what you want? Is that what you expect? No. No, it isn't. So going into the ceremony, my intention was simply, show me who I have become. Within that intention, I thought to myself, prior to the ceremony beginning, I will simply ask, when have I thought these thoughts before? When have I felt these feelings before? And deeper into that, when did I first? Let me stress, when did I first think like this? When did I have these thoughts originally? When did I first feel like this? When did I have these feelings originally? Some of you listening to this may already be putting the pieces together. Many of our thoughts, many of our feelings are not developed when we are teenagers, when we are preteens. They are developed when we are what? Infants. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years old. These foundations are just that. These are the foundations that have led you to the person that you've become today. With but a simple and yet so powerful intention, I entered my first ceremony. Hey, show me, Mother Ayahuasca, who I have become. And with the tool set of when did I first think this way, when did I first feel this way, I set off. Now, for the hyper-practical amongst you, it's not a very complicated process. You go up to a shaman, you give them a cup, they pour a liquid into the cup. You drink said liquid. You then go lie down, sit down, and you begin the journey. For many, there is a second tendering, there is a second cup of Mother Ayahuasca. So you will go up for a second cup. For some, they may actually have a third or fourth cup. Again, it is your journey. It is your experience. You are unique, you are an individual, and you have to take that journey on your own. There is no right or wrong to be gleaned from whether or not you need but one cup or whether you have to have 4 cups. For my part, I did in fact have a second cup. After my second cup, both the purge and the hallucinatory experience began. I can sum up the purge very quickly. Traumatic. I don't need to go into great detail, but I did, in fact, sweat harder than I've probably ever sweat in my life, and I did not throw up. Not once. Not once over my entire experience did I ever throw up. But, dear listener, I did purge. It's coming out of your mouth or it's coming out of your anus. But you will purge, dear listener. You will purge. As I became more aware of Mother Ayahuasca holding my hand, taking me on this journey, I saw what is a honeycomb that permeates every living and non-living thing. To repeat, for the sake of clarity, I saw a honeycomb that permeates every living and non-living thing. Everything gives off a vibration and is energy, even if that energy is so slowed down that in our conscious state, we see these inanimate objects as what? As a floor, as a chair, as a table. They are still made up of energy. They are still made up of atoms, and they still resonate and have a vibration. You, dear listener, have a much different vibration because not only are you energy, but you are energy in motion. Your energy, your vibration actually permeates out into this honeycomb and is then absorbed by all other matter. You, dear listener, have said this numerous times. You walk into a room, you can feel whether or not it is jubilant, whether the people in that room are happy, or you can feel whether or not it is sad or it is angry. This whole ghost hunter thing that I still laugh at, where you've got these idiots who run around on the Discovery Channel or whatever channel will put these nonsensical jokers on, and what do they always say when they walk into these supposed haunted houses? That you can feel the cold, that you can feel the trepidation, that you can feel these spirits. Whether consciously or unconsciously, these grifters are tapping into something that is real. I saw this. Our thoughts and our feelings are energy that actually project out of us into this honeycomb. To describe it to you, dear listener, it's like throwing a rock into a pond and then watching the waves from that rock reverberate in a 360-degree vibration. All of you have seen that. This is different. It's not 360 degrees of vibration in 2 dimensions. It's in 3 dimensions. It permeates out into all of time and space in 3 dimensions. Here is where I had to hang on to the ground in order to keep myself from falling off the face of the planet. Not only are our thoughts and our energy, these vibrations, permeating into this honeycomb, into the universe, I could see these things as a vibration, as a wave. It comes back to you. It comes back to the people in your immediate surroundings. It can come back to people all over the world. It comes back to matter, whether animate or inanimate. Now, I've heard anecdotally in popular culture, from people, the media, what have you, people go on these psychedelic trips and they'll say things to the effect of, man, the universe, it's alive. And I have to do that falsetto voice because I'm the guy who would hear something like that and say, shut the hell up, hippie. But seeing this vibration being emitted by people and then going out into the universe, but also having it come back, it looked like that honeycomb was breathing. That's right, dear listener. That honeycomb was breathing with the vibration of not only animate, not only living energy, but with inanimate energy. The universe is in fact alive. Quite simply, as I was thinking, as I was feeling, I became aware that all of the negative emotions, all of the negative thoughts that I have permeate out into the universe, and what happens? It reverberates back to me. When I'm thinking positive thoughts, when I am having positive feelings, it permeates out into the universe and it comes back to me. I will touch on this more in the next act, but we are, in fact, all creators. The Bible, the Torah, the Quran, the Buddhists, the Hindus. This concept is universal, that we are all creators, because, dear listener, it's true. In addition, another concept that is consistent amongst Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, the universe, particularly as it has been explained through your subconscious mind, basically the receiver, the transmitter that recognizes, deciphers this energy, these vibrations, it's literal. It is literal. It doesn't understand nuance. It doesn't understand sarcasm. It doesn't understand subtlety. What you say, what you focus on, it is transmitted and it comes back to you. A great example of this, and I actually thought this and experienced this, is when people say, and I believe that they do so rhetorically, oh, I would just die if. I would just die if Alabama wins another national championship. As an aside, I hope none of you are actually saying this, A, because the universe does take this literally, and B, did you see Alabama play the last couple of weeks? The kids look primed for another title run. But when you say, I would just die if, that vibration, that energy is actually dark. It's actually negative. I could see it transmitting a dark vibration, a dark energy out into the universe, out into this honeycomb. That was an epiphany for me because I am still struggling with the use of language, my use of language. I consider myself one with witty repartee, witty banter. This very podcast, when I created it, was one of satire, where I was questioning, through a satirical take, my own fandom in sports, politics, religion, my own fealty to these things. Although many of you, I believe, appreciate that wit, that banter, a satirical look at different issues, whether they be sports related, whether they be in the realm of politics or social issues or religion. The universe doesn't get it. And because that has been so much a part of the way I have lived, of the way that I've created the language that I use, of the way I communicate with other people, it created a lot of resistance in me to what I was seeing, to what I was actually seeing. I am still wrestling with it to this day. So, you may ask, in the throes of this purge, in the throes of this hallucinogenic state, what did you realize? What insights were revealed? What epiphany did you have? To quickly refresh, my intention going in was, Mother Ayahuasca, show me who I have become. And then within that, when do I have these thoughts? When do I have these emotions? And when did I first have these thoughts? When did I first have these emotions? After I surrendered and accepted what I was seeing, I was able to then go back to remember my intention is to discover who I have become. I asked for this to be shown, and it was. Remember, dear listener, Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want, not what you expect.
Act free my inner child.
I have read The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. The way that he writes, the way that his theories are presented, the concept of the shadow, the concept of the inner child, it made a lot of sense. I have read criticisms of this book from modern practitioners, psychiatrists, psychologists, that its presentation is so dry that it is almost formulaic. It is written as a manual for practitioners, in a sense, as much as it is written to explain and or advocate for the theories that Jung had come up with. I've read more modern interpretations of the inner child that make me want to punch people in the face. These tomes are more in tune with one's feelings. And although I believed as I read them that they were written with sincerity, that they were written authentically, the concepts, the way that they were presented, did not appeal to me. I have read You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. I have read Embrace Your Inner Critic by the Stones, the husband and wife team. It was hard for me to adopt any of the practice, any of the recommendations made in these books because of its pure, unadulterated gushing. Just that gushing, that cream hose of gush. Hug your inner child. Caress your inner child. Encourage your inner child. Love your inner child. You read enough of this and you just want to punch somebody in the throat. A natural, rational, reasonable reaction. Doesn't appeal to me on these sports networks where you see people fawning all over their favorite team, and it doesn't appeal to me in terms of self-help. Fast forward to me sitting in a room with a bunch of other people, and the lecture is about your inner child in anticipation of going and doing an ayahuasca ceremony. Yes, dear listener, I said to myself more than once, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? Fast forward again, no more than 5 or 6 hours later, in the midst of me tripping my balls off. Now, I've wrestled with how I'm going to present what happened, what I actually experienced. Some of the things that I saw, that I witnessed, were so powerful that I actually took notes in the midst of this ceremony, in the throes of Mother Ayahuasca. This is not very legible text. If I'm going to criticize the universe, if I'm going to write a letter to Mother Ayahuasca, she didn't help me much in the penmanship. I have decided to keep the particulars to myself, but to explain, if you ask, you shall receive, and as many people who I went through this ceremony with attested to, we saw ourselves as children. In my experience, I was not me as a child. I was actually witnessing myself as a third party, as an observer, as a child. Immediately, all of this resistance that I had to this inner child therapy, into this inner child theorem, it immediately evaporated. I saw myself as that 2-year-old, as that 3-year-old, and I was immediately struck by how innocent and ignorant I was as that 2-year-old, as that 3-year-old. I was, as all 2-year-olds are, as all 3-year-olds are, a blank slate. And I want to be clear about the words that I'm using. You are innocent as a child. I was innocent as a child, but that innocence is a product of ignorance. You just don't know. The entire world is a spectacle to you, is a wonderment to you. This fact, this very simple truth, is extremely hard for us to remember. Then you begin to develop a sense of yourself as you start to discover the world. But as I witnessed with my own 2 eyes during this experience, Mother Ayahuasca showing me events that transpired that helped shape who I was. You come into this life, dear listener, with the ability, and I mean it when I say it, the ability to experience joy, laughter, wonderment, a sense of awe. You do not need to be taught. There is no instruction for you to actually experience these emotions. You also inherently have a sense of fear. This is hardwired into who you are. But you do not have an emotional radar. You do not have an inner sense of what? Shame and guilt. As I endeavor to do in these podcasts, Act 1, Act 2, yes, it will correlate into Act 3. Episode 2, Episode 10, hopefully it correlates into the presentation for later podcasts. There is a method to the madness. So let's go back a bit. What did I say? I had an intention, and then I had the layers of that intention. Show me who I've become, and then show me when I first thought certain thoughts, when I first felt certain emotions. And I saw myself as a 2-year-old, as a 3-year-old, as a 4-year-old, interacting with different authority figures in my life and learning shame and learning guilt. As I stated in Act 1, was I then given the shame manual? Was I then given the guilt instructions? No. How was I taught these emotions? while engaging in some act, an authority figure reprimanded young Patrick, but as I saw it happening, it was not in a caring, a loving, a kind way. It was in my mind, as an adult, it was in my mind undignified. These were authority figures that were projecting their own shame and their own guilt onto a 2-year-old, onto a 3-year-old, onto a 4-year-old. I can't stress this enough, dear listener. It was undignified. Now, if I was able to take that mental movie and actually project it out, to record it and then present it to those individuals, I can practically guarantee you that they would not remember that it happened that way. And to be frank, I can't attest that it truly happened that way. This is something that I saw as a vision during an ayahuasca ceremony. Mother Ayahuasca revealing these things to me. But folks, I'm here to tell you, it happened that way. They did what they did. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I actually wanted to go over to that 2-year-old, to that 3-year-old, to that 4-year-old, and put my arms around him and hug him. All of those things that I read that really disgusted me, that I could not embrace, in that moment, I appreciated them. I appreciated what Louise Hay was trying to communicate. I appreciated what the Stones were trying to communicate. And then something else hit me. And this hit me like a ton of bricks as well. You need shame and guilt to operate within the nuclear family that you are in when you were a child, to operate within the school dynamic that you were in when you were a child, to help you develop a sense of right and wrong. And let me give you an example that came to me in an epiphany as to how this operates. The kid and the cookie jar. You've all heard the analogy, right? Parent tells child, you don't get any cookies now. Child goes and gets a cookie. Parent catches child with hand in the cookie jar. I've had friends talk about the things that they've caught their children doing and thinking, what the hell were these kids thinking in doing that after I had told them not to, and doing it in such a way where there was no way that we weren't, as parents, going to catch them. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it may very well be hitting you as well, dear listener. The 2-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old. They're not stupid. They are so innocent that they are ignorant of these consequences. They're ignorant of the guilt that they should feel, of the shame that they should feel, because it's not hardwired into them to feel it. You have to teach it to them. And that has to be the hardest thing in the world for an authority figure, for a parent. And in my situation, watching me have to learn through the things that happened to me about shame, about guilt, I actually felt empathy for those authority figures. No one gave me a manual. No one gave me instructions. But you know what? No one gave them a manual. No one gave them instructions. And they didn't know any better than to project their own shame and their own guilt onto a child as a method for teaching that child about shame, about guilt. And then the next epiphany. Oh my God, I'm doing the same thing as an adult, projecting out shame and guilt. And it may manifest in some other way, but it's nothing more than shame and it's nothing more than guilt. Because, dear listener, because there is no manual, there are no instructions, while shame and guilt serve a very important purpose for you as you are a child growing up, you don't know when A, to apply shame, to apply guilt, and B, you don't know when to turn it off. So while you need to use these tools, they are part of your toolbox as you were growing up, you don't need them as an adult to the extent that you needed them when you were a child, when you were 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. but they are just as much a part of your psychological or your emotional toolbox into your preteens, into your teens, into your 20s, 30s, your 40s. You use them for the rest of your life, even though as tools, they are no longer serving you. These are the things that I actually saw in these visions. I had these epiphanies. Suffice to say, as I was seeing the things that I was seeing, as I was feeling the things that I was feeling, as I was going through the throes of Mother Ayahuasca working her way through my body, I was also tripping balls. Harken back, dear listener, 4 or 5 hours before the ceremony began. The shaman advised, recommended, when you are in the throes, when there are things that you are confronting, do you run from it or do you run to it? Run into it. Run toward it. Dear listener, as hard as that may present to you listening to this podcast, sitting in a car, sitting in an office, on an exercise bike, in a gym, wherever you may be, let me tell you something. It is infinitely harder to work into your fear, to work into anxiety, to work into any of the emotions that you're feeling when you're tripping your balls off in a foreign country than it is when you're sitting in the seat of your car. But as many of you who know me understand, my carefree, it attitude, I went into it. I went toward it. What did I tell you earlier, dear listener? I did not vomit one time. Not once. But there were 2 gods at work that evening. One, the maker of the universe, the mother, infinite intelligence, I am, Allah, Jehovah, God, Yahweh, whatever label you want to give it. The second god at work that evening was the porcelain god. Your sturdy, take it for granted every single day, run-of-the-mill toilet. When I went into the emotion, when I ran to it instead of from it, I had, well, let's just say, an urge. And I had no other choice but to satisfy that urge, which is in fact a purge. Yes, a purge. I went and I sat on that toilet, and I actually heard in my head, do you want to let it all go? Do you want to just release it? I said, yes, I do. And then I immediately regretted that because, oh, did I release. The releasing was such, the purging was such, that it was actually an exhausting endeavor. I hate to spoil the ending for you, dear listener, but I survived. I felt both lighter and enlightened. No longer holding on to the things that no longer serve me. I laid my head down on the pillow that night and slept like a baby. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.